turn back here to Revelation. We've been making our way through this book, and we're in the final stretch. It's as we come to chapter 21, it's good to see that we're coming into something that's not nearly as grim as what we looked at with the judgment and all of what takes place at Armageddon and those things that are written there, and that the beast and his false prophet and the devil himself is destroyed. Here in chapter 21, 1 through 8, we're continuing and finishing the thought that was raised, I think, in chapter 20, verse 15. And you can just glance back at that. And it says there, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. And the question is, well, what's the experience? What happened to those whose name is written in the Lamb's book of life? We talk about the exclusion, but what about the inclusion? What's happening here with those? And for those, and through the vision that John has, we are given here a brief statement. And this brief statement, it may not seem brief to you, but verses 1 through 8, that's brief for a preacher. Okay? In verses 9 through to the very end, he's going to virtually expand on this. He's going to exegete that. He's going to explain. There's an in-depth explanation, and it's a vivid picture of what we see there. And this is apocalyptic language that we will be seeing of the glamour and the glory and the beauty and the dynamic vision of what this heavenly Jerusalem that descends to earth. But in the meantime, we need to take here this brief statement and to see that it's dealing, what John is dealing with here, and what the Lord is speaking to us through John, is that this is the inauguration of the new age. The new age, the inauguration of the new age. And this is going to be something that will be taking place in this new age of the New Jerusalem. And as I said, the remainder of chapter 21 and actually into chapter 22, verse 5, it deals with the culmination of salvation history as the bride is introduced as the New Jerusalem. And in verses 1 through 8 this morning, we're going to consider two things. We're going to consider, first of all, what he sees, what John sees, and then second of all, what he hears. And that will be in verses 3 through 8. And then, as I said, in verses 9 and following, we'll look at that next week and see that there are some parallels that show up in chapter 21 and chapter 22. There are some parallels that can be found there. So I've given you a little something to maybe go and look for in the days ahead. And so first of all here, John immediately sees something amazing. Look back at verse 1. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. Well, verse 1 answers the question that is posed by my sermon title, so what's new? And John would say, well, the short answer is everything. Everything. Literally, everything is new. And just when you think you're going to need nail clippers, just when you think that you might need to get a new comb, for those of us that are a little challenged in that way, that's nowhere, that's not pictured here. There's something that's taking place here that's far deeper than your fingernails or the length of your hair, your complexion, or any of those things. It's far deeper than that. The old order, what we have been used to. Picking up a newspaper and reading maybe the obituaries first. Or perhaps going and looking and seeing, there go taxes again. Oh my goodness, there's a crime wave. Look out, stay out of Claremont. And be careful when you drive through Springfield, or going into Boston, or New York City. You know, those sorts of, that wariness, that sort of fear. Or the phone rings, and on the other end of the line is your doctor, and your doctor says, well, yes, I know we had tests this week, but I'd really like you to come to my office, and I'd really like to have a chat with you. I don't know about you, but if you get a phone call like that, suddenly in the back of your mind is, uh-oh, what did they find? What's going on? And our anxiety level might have been here, and now it's elevated to something like this. It ratchets up with bad news and things like that. Well, everything is new here. The old order, the old creation has passed away. And John sees here a new created order. And he's going to explain this. He's going to get into this in some depth later, and we'll look more next week at that. And there's enough here for us to hold on to this week for our time. But one thing that we need to see right away, one thing that might cause confusion, where it says there that he saw a new heaven. He's not talking about the heaven where God is residing, in the place of the heaven. He's not speaking there of that kind of heaven. That word for heaven there is in Greek, the word uranos. And it's the same word translated in other places as sky. The earth and the sky. The heavens, you know, we talk about the heavenly bodies. I think what John is seeing is a new cosmology. Something very radically new, a recreation. Poor Carl Sagan would be flabbergasted, I think, and if some of you remember the old PBS show that Sagan hosted and was the voice for, called Cosmos, and he talked about the planets and the stars, and you know, billions and billions of years ago, things happened. Well, we're seeing here that with this new order, this new creation, God recreates something very drastically. Incidentally, if you have a Living Bible and you read Revelation 21:1 in the Living Bible, it translates the word here, there was a new heaven and a new sky. Or a new earth and a new sky, I should say. That the old earth and the old sky no longer existed. That's in the Living Bible. So, very legitimate translation here. Very legitimate of translating that. And incidentally, if you just glance your eyes back to chapter 20, verse 11. I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. From his presence, what does it say there? Earth and sky fled away in the ESV. It's translated there as sky, not heaven. Now, many translations. I went through Bible Gateway and I checked this. And this may cause confusion. That's the only reason I'm mentioning it. Don't confuse the heaven that's in 21:1 with anything more than the heavens above us, the sky and the surrounding atmosphere and the things above us. And if you follow science at all, you know that some of the atmosphere around us is being eroded, that there's more incidents of skin cancer, and because of pollutants in the air, that there's problems with the atmosphere. this world. And last week I mentioned it, and again, go back to Revelation. Go back to the judgments that you see there, and note how many places God's judgment isn't just on people, but on creation. Where creation is mentioned, there's fire, there's destruction. So the old order, the fallenness of creation, when Adam and Eve sinned, it just didn't affect humans. It affected the whole created order. God is going to make all things new. Sometimes we only think about ourselves, but nature around us, we go out and say, man, it doesn't get any better than this. Look at that sunset. Look at that. And it's great, it's wonderful, and it does declare the glory of God, but not as clearly as one day the glory of God will be declared in its finality and in its fullness. So what is John seeing? I believe what John is seeing in his vision is a new earth, a new cosmology. And my question is, will the moon and the stars disappear and be recreated? I don't know. It doesn't say that. But simply, he says here, I think that's possible. It's not addressed in the passage because the point here is that he has made something new. John is seeing something new. Now, when he mentions the new earth, I think that's significant. And it's quite significant, I think, in our day. I don't know if you have ever done a study of, or listened to, or read anything about how our culture is descended from the Greeks. We get a lot of things from the Greeks in terms of art, the balance in architecture. We see in our own culture a revival of the culture of Rome and of Greece. Rome was built on Greek ideas and that sort of thing. And one of the philosophical ideas that has permeated life is the old Greek dualism of an upper level and a lower level. And the lower level is the drudgery of this world and of this life. The dualistic Greeks believed that anything in the lower realm, physical realm, was impoverished, was not good, was in fact dirty, unclean, and would not be seen or would not survive in the upper level, the spirit level. This dualism is also seen in Eastern religions, where the goal of reaching nirvana or reaching that point of the highest level of being is to lose yourself in the nothingness of the spirit, of blending in. Well, that is so, the scriptures contradict that overwhelmingly throughout the scripture. God created this world, and he saw that it was good. God created Adam, man. And when God created Adam and God created Eve, he saw that he created them as corporeal beings in a body, a physical body. And he saw that it was good. And I believe that when John sees a new heaven and a new earth, the resurrected body is going to be that kind of body that is physical and of a different dynamic that we see here. One of the things that we perhaps don't realize, and I'm not making a statement here this morning, but if you are, if you're even considering cremation for your final remains, think through that. check that out and see where that idea comes from. It's not a biblical idea. It goes back to the Romans and from them back to the Greeks. And that was because the body was not seen as something that... Now, I know it's less expensive than a full-blown funeral. And I'm only talking about this not because I went to the cemetery yesterday and not because we got a cemetery plot a couple weeks ago, but I have been thinking about that. And I did, when I went, I'll say it again, I went into the town office, and they know that we're leaving, or we're retiring, and I went into the town office and I was handing over some of my supervisor of the checklist books since I resigned from that. And I was handing that over for the next person to take over. And I came up to the counter there and I said, well, we're interested in taking up permanent residency here in town. They looked at me like, I said, well, at least this part of it. They looked at me and I said, we want a cemetery plot. Oh. So we're just down the road. We're just down the aisle from where Pam's ashes were interred. Now, let me just say, I believe that God resurrects ashes, decomposed bones from thousands of years ago. Bones do decompose in certain soil environments, and the patriarchs didn't bury their bones in anything other than their bones were gathered and put into an ossuary at a later date after all their flesh had decomposed and all that. I know this is kind of gruesome, sorry. But God in the new resurrection will create a new body, but what I want to make a statement at my funeral and and when I'm buried, what I want to point out is that what God gave me, and my last days, I don't know what they'll be. This physical frame of ours wears out, and it's diseased, and there's cancer, and there's other deforming sorts of illnesses and things that can plague us, dementia, all of that. We know that. That's the bad news. But still at the end, God has created something good. God created something good. God created you. Yes, the genes and the genetic makeup of your background, it's all there. God created that. God created how that works. And from my point of view, and I'm only giving you my point of view, the Bible's not saying anything here about that. Okay, I'm making an application. And maybe this is more to me. But the application here is I want to make a statement that even in the end, God created something good. And I think when we see this that the Greeks did one thing based on their philosophical ideas. If you are choosing cremation, don't follow the Greek model that, gee, your body's a bad or an evil thing or a dirty thing. Don't follow that line of thought. Reason through it. Think. God gave you a brain. Use it. Read the scriptures. Use it. Make application. Make a wise choice based on what the Spirit is speaking to you through the Word. My counsel. And so there is this new body. I'd like you to go back to the Gospel of John and just turn to John chapter 20 and also into Luke chapter 24. So John 20, and what we're looking at in John 20 is the resurrected Jesus Christ. Now, Paul says that Jesus is the first fruits. What did he mean about that in 1 Corinthians 15, that he's the first fruits? Means that he shows us, he's a pattern for what's coming. This is what is going to happen to you. What happened to Jesus is he's the first fruits. And isn't it great when you get that first tomato? It gives you a promise. Oh, there's more of these wonderful tomatoes coming. There's more of this coming. Oh, I can't wait. Those first green beans fresh out of your garden. Oh. Now, later, by the end of July, maybe the 1st of August, you're going to say, when is this garden ever going to quit? But those first fruits they are giving you the word of what's coming later. And look what he says here. On the evening on that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them. I don't think that he had walked through that doorway. I think, or when the door was open and then they locked it, I think he comes through the wall. He stood in their midst. And they say that again later in the passage, down to verse 20. I'm at 19. At John 20:19, and again at verse 26. And the next week, Thomas says, gee, I don't think I can really trust here what you're saying. And they said, we've seen the Lord. Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I'll never believe. Now, this indicates to me something, that the resurrected Jesus was not as readily identified post-resurrection as he had been pre-resurrection. We're going to look at Luke and see what. There are disciples that don't recognize him. It says that they were prevented from recognizing him, but they didn't recognize him until what happened? He broke bread. Remember at the Last Supper, what did Jesus say? I'm not going to break bread with you again until in my kingdom. Suddenly, here it is, the resurrected Jesus breaking bread. And then he vanishes from their sight. Now, you and I, there are times that perhaps we would like to vanish. There were days when I was in school as a kid and the teacher said, Harold, I wanted to vanish. When we've been put on the spot by something. Look there at verse 26. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again. Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And Thomas there puts his finger, and Jesus says, see, put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. So there's something very crucial and familiar here with I think Catholics call this the stigmata, the signs of his crucifixion, but that there's something different on that spiritual resurrection. And then you can look back in Luke, if you care to, just quickly in Luke chapter 24, and there the passage 13 through 16 where Jesus is walking with them. It says there, while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he goes on, what's this conversation that you're having? And they continue on the way. In verse 27, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures of things concerning himself. And when he was at table with them, he broke the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them, and their eyes were opened. And they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. Physical, he's eating, but there's something dynamically different about the resurrection body. Now, this isn't going to be, the thought of me when I was working through this, I thought, remember as a kid, Halloween, you'd go to somebody's doorbell, you'd ring the doorbell and then run away. We had one person in our neighborhood who had the audacity to have a doorbell. Only one doorbell that I knew in all of Windsor, Vermont. And I think on Halloween, they just about had it with kids running up. Okay, I know you're out there. They knew it was the kids in the neighborhood. They must have gotten really, they cut the wires after a while. Well, it's not going to be any pranking like that, believe me, with us vanishing or something silly or stupid like that at this point in time. But here is this, the eternal showing up in the temporal. And there's something of this world, this next world, this world that is to come, giving a foretaste of the world that will be. And we see a bit of that here, I think. George Eldon Ladd points out in his commentary that biblical thought always places man on a redeemed earth, not in a heavenly realm removed from earthly existence. It's not going to be that we're vapors somewhere living in a spirit vaporous world, but that the picture that's being portrayed here is that we are existing, we're living on a redeemed, a new creation, a new world that God has created. Together, altogether new. And I would hazard to say it's the new Eden, if you will, but more settled and more populated by those that have come. What am I saying here? I think we can take from this new heaven and this new earth is that your body matters, you are God's creation. Even though it's frail and vulnerable, it declares the glory of God even more so in the new creation. And we should also note here that there's no sea present. In the ancient world, the sea was something fearful, it was dark, it was restless, it was unpredictable. Over in Isaiah chapter 57, verse 20, it says there, this is Isaiah 57:20, but the wicked are like the tossing sea, for it cannot be quiet, and its waters toss up mire and dirt. And I just read something the other day that down in Massachusetts, one of the public beaches that the city had put out sand for the beach, it was gone in 3 days. And it was something like, several $1,000s. I think it was like $250,000 actually of what they had to try to have a beach there for summertime. And so the sea took it. The sea gives and the sea takes away. Second of all here, so what else does John see? He sees the holy city, the New Jerusalem, verse 2, coming down out of heaven from God. And I think what we're seeing here is a metaphor. It's metaphorical that this is the bride. And this is kind of unusual, I think, we would say, in verses 3 through 8. But John's explanation is announced from the throne of what he has seen, the descent of the New Jerusalem. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people. That's not underlined in your Bible. It should be highlighted. That verse should be highlighted. In the Old Testament, in Exodus chapters 25 through 27, you can go back and read sometime, God there in that portion of the law, of the Torah, gives directions for the building of a tabernacle. Basically a tent. And it's very elaborate instructions. And it was in that tent that God promised to meet with Israel as they made their way through the wilderness. And sometimes it was called the tent of meeting. And that word tabernacle was used there. And you can see this in Exodus 25:17, and again in Exodus 25, verses 20 through 23. And when Israel camped in the wilderness, the tabernacle was the central structure around which the tribes camped. So it was in the center of their camp as they were venturing through the wilderness. Each night when they camped, they would camp around the tabernacle, which was in the center of their camp. It was the central structure and they can't go along the perimeter. It's interesting that I bring that up because the word tabernacle in Greek is used in John chapter 1, verse 14. John 1:14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. You may want to put that as a cross-reference for this passage, because it's the same word, tabernacle, that Jesus comes to dwell. He tabernacled in our midst. He comes as God dwelling in the midst of people. Jesus he pitched his tent among us because he was fully human and fully God. He came to live and to die and to make atonement for our sins. And I believe that we can go back and think here through salvation history that since Pentecost, God has indwelt the church through his Spirit. Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians 2. Ephesians chapter 2:18, for through him, Ephesians 2:18, for through him we both have access in one Spirit to the Father. So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints, members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure has joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place. This kind of, it's like a tabernacle place for God by the Spirit. And here he's writing this to the church, to Christians. And incidentally, that passage, I think, is thinking forward to this vision of this Jerusalem, this dwelling place. When Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you, a dwelling place. It's in that heavenly Jerusalem. It's in that new Jerusalem. There's a dwelling place. You're included in that if your name is written in the book of life, in the Lamb's book of life. It's a wonderful blessing. God's Spirit indwelling the church is through faith and not by sight, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:17. We walk by faith and not by sight. But in the new creation, what happens? It changes. It changes here. At the consummation, faith will be changed to sight, and they shall see his face. Turn back to Revelation and look there in Revelation. Just check out again the passage that we're looking at. And then turn page to Revelation 22, verse 4. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads, and night will be no more. They will need no lamp, no light of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. In this case, faith is seeing, and seeing is faith in heaven. We'll be there in his very presence. And this will be the fulfillment of all that we have hoped for, and all that we have prayed for, and all that we trust God for. And all I can think of is that the angel again said, what will you call this child? Well, you'll call him Jesus, you'll call him Jesus. But there's also a name given him, Emmanuel. What is that? God with us. Here is the fulfillment of the name that is given to Jesus Christ. God with us. God is coming to live in our midst. God will be in your neighborhood. Rick and Ruth are in our neighborhood this morning. The Almighty, the Divine, is coming to dwell with His people. Not remote, not somewhere where we'll get memos or texts or emails. He'll be in our midst. We'll surround the almighty throne of God. The essential blessing that we see here is direct, untroubled fellowship with God. I don't know about you, but there have been nights where I've woken up and I had anxiety about Jeffrey and Marie in Canada and the wildfires, and they had to be removed from where they lived because 8 years ago, where they lived burned down. The buildings, everything gone. Clear-cut fire, burned up everything. And so I was worried about that. So we were praying, but still trusting that the Lord would answer. But you know, the Lord can say, well, no, I want these people in Fort McMurray in Alberta, I want them to realize that there's more to life than the possessions that you have in this world. Your boat, they have a lot of boats up there, they're next to a river. They have RVs, they have motorcycles, big motorcycles, and four-wheelers that they go out into the muskeg and they go off mudded. God might say, no, I want all of that to be melted. I want that to be gone. I want them to realize that there's more to life than things. Well, God answered our prayer. This morning, Jeff and Marie, they got the notice yesterday. They're planning on returning to Fort McMurray, that the evacuation order was lifted and they can safely go home. In fact, it snowed in Fort McMurray yesterday. Did you ever think that a good thing would be snow in the month of May? Well, not in our situation, but for them, an answer to prayer. An answer to prayer, and God allowed them to go to return home. But you've been anxious, I'm sure, in the night. Well, that's not going to happen when we're in God's presence. Those anxieties, those troubles that we have will be removed from us. And probably, as I was reading, one of the greatest fears of life is the fear of death. As we read here, death has already been done away with. But it's reiterated here. It's reiterated here in this passage where, so we have this fellowship with God, and along with this fellowship is the comfort of God. Tears are wiped away. There is no more death. This is also a blessing that flows from fellowship with God, that there's no more death, that there's no suffering, there are no ailments. There's no mourning, and by that it's the M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. But there's no night, so I guess there's no morning. It's 24/7 morning, M-O-R-N-I-G. It's 24/7 because the light of God's presence is there with us. And so God keeps His promises. He says here, this is a trustworthy and true promise. God keeps His promises. The purpose of God in redemption is as sure as if it has already happened. That's how sure it is. The future is secure because God keeps His word. He is the eternal truth teller. And one thing more that we see here, and I need to close with this, I'm right at closing time, but just turn back to Revelation for just a moment. One more place here. where God speaks and he says, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. I think of Isaiah 51. Ho, those that thirst, come and purchase food and have your needs met by me. But I also think of the woman at the well in John chapter 4. And that story is a compelling story. It's compelling because many times Jesus hid his identity. But in his conversation with the woman, he says, I can give you water that will beat the water that we're pulling up out of the well. It'll beat it flat out, hands down. Because it will spring up forever, and it will be total satisfaction, not just for your physical thirst, but for the thirst of your soul. And in their conversation, she says, I want that. And she meant she wanted it because, as the story unfolds, she was in a relationship where she was living a life of seeking to find happiness. Maybe finding happiness in sex. Maybe finding happiness in different experiences. Maybe those were where she was going. And Jesus, in his incisive wisdom, brings her to the point of, and she says, well, I don't have a husband. Go and bring your husband. And she said, well, I don't, and Jesus says, she says, I need to go get my husband. And Jesus said, well, no, you don't have a husband. Could look there and be more clear on this. But this is number 5. This is number 5 who you're living with. And she goes, you must be a prophet. And what you're saying coincides with what I know from the Bible that I've heard is that there's a Messiah coming. And what does Jesus say to her? I'm he. I am. He doesn't reveal this to a lot of other people, but here's a heart that is hungering and thirsting after God, and Jesus says to her, I am the one. And if you turn there in John chapter 4, and you look at verses 39 through 42, she did believe, and she went back to her village, and people were saved. Because her hungering and thirsting, Jesus satisfied her thirst and her hunger. What she was looking for, there's that, I think it's a country western song, looking for love in all the wrong places. That's her. That's her. That might be you. You may not be looking for love, but you may be looking for something else. And you've looked in all the wrong places. Jesus says, turn to me. I'm the one that can satisfy your thirst. I'm the one that can bring peace to your soul. And here in Revelation 21, God says, I'll do this, and it's eternal. We will never hunger and thirst in heaven unsatisfied. Do you understand that? We may, but we can go instantly and be fed and can be our thirst be satisfied because the Father will satisfy the needs of those whose names are written in the book of life. And so in answer to last week at the end, what's going on for those who come to the Lord? I pray that you would invite people to know this risen Lord. I pray that you would sacrifice so that people, your friends and your neighbors, would come to know Jesus as their Savior. It is serious, eternal business. And it's no clearer than in Revelation 20:15 through Revelation 21, 1 through 8. The distinctions, the contrast is stark. Life, death. Life, death. Pilgrim's Progress, that is put before a person in Pilgrim's Progress that same question. Life, will you choose life, or will you choose death? It's not a light question. So what's new? Are you part of the new creation? Is God making you new? I pray He is. Each day. Each day. Wouldn't it be great to share that with your